welcome to another episode of The Wellbeing Show. I forgot what it was then. That's me all over. I forget everything. My brain is just sort of really not on top form. I don't think it ever has been. I'm pretending that I used to have a brain that functioned at some point. So it never did. Welcome. It's lovely to have you all here. I've got a fantastic guest, Michelle Martinez, who I sort of feel I know, although this is the first time I've ever met you, because I met Marco, your husband who died. I met him for many years and he was always raving about you. So I sort of knew you that way, as it were. So it's the first time I've met you. We'll come to you in a minute, Michelle. I'm going to do this sort of what's called the furniture moving in the business, which is just to welcome people, let you know this is a live podcast, and you're welcome to join us. You can drop questions for Michelle or myself. If you're that bored, you can ask me questions, but I'm here every week, so I wouldn't bother. Save them for Michelle in one of the streaming platforms we're on, either on Facebook Live or on YouTube. Or you can drop me a note on WhatsApp. So +44 7506 319 745. So drop me a message on WhatsApp if you've got some questions, and if you want to, you can join us on the show. Actually, you can call in and I'll get you on. I'll make you a star. There you go. You can't say more than that, can you? So enough of that, enough of me, and it's just my great pleasure to sort of welcome you on the show, Michelle. How are you doing over in beautiful France? That's where you are, isn't it?
Yes, I am. I'm between Toulouse and Bordeaux, down in the southwest.
Love that part of the world. I once cycled from Rosas in Spain across the Pyrenees and down into Bordeaux and along the Garonne River Valley, which I'm sure you know well, don't you? The River Garonne, that valley is Bordeaux.
I do. And the Garonne is about 5 kilometres from my house.
That's right. There used to be a thing called the European bicycle bus company. I don't know if they still exist, but it was a coach you could get which had a sort of trailer on the back for your bicycles and stop at various places, and you could organise a trip. I'm sure they're still around, and I'm sure James will find them if he can and give them a free plug for anybody who wants a cycling holiday. Very beautiful part of the world, but something tells me you're not actually French by birth. I don't know what it is.
And no, I'm from North Nottinghamshire. I'm from a mining village in North Nottinghamshire. So it's rather bizarre that this is where I've ended up and this is where I want to stay.
Yeah, this is going to be part of the conversation this evening, isn't it? About how you ended up in France. Shall we start there, actually? How did you end up in France?
How did I end up in France? Well, I went on a school trip in 1972 to France, and so quite a long time ago, and ever since I've always wanted to live in France, and every year I used to want to come on holiday to France, and my husband always wanted to go to some Mediterranean islands, and we always used to have the Brittany versus Mediterranean island conversation, but when we were in our mid-50s, we kind of decided that at last, with the children gone, we could move to France. And so in 2016, the month after the Brexit vote, we moved to France.
Great time.
Great time. At least we got in before they closed the borders. So we, for once in our life, we were fairly sensible. We rented out our house in London and rented various houses in various regions until we found the perfect spot, which is here. And we bought this house in September 2019. It was the perfect spot, but it wasn't the perfect house. The perfect house was going to be 3 beds. But this has got 6 bedrooms and 5 bathrooms, and Marco decided that it would be a great idea if we had a bed and breakfast. Now, he would have been useless running a bed and breakfast, but as ever, I thought, whatever, let's do a bed and breakfast. So he had me crazily rearranging furniture so that we could take lots of photos, created a website. Everybody thought we had a marvelous bed and breakfast, when what we actually had was a big house full of empty rooms. He launched our bed and breakfast, started to get bookings, and then died. And so I was stuck in a field in southwest France. And then 2 months later, COVID came. And so not only had I lost my husband, I lost my family and friends and everybody in the UK. And also, my husband was the fluent French speaker. So it was a bit of a baptism of fire. But I've now got lots of French friends who find my French absolutely adorable. My English friends think my French is hilarious. As one friend says, I'm the only person she knows who can speak French with an East Midlands accent.
You sound like I heard you on the phone talking to when we were chatting on the phone, and I was amazed by your French. It is very, very English, your French.
Well, it's so like Jane Birkin's, apparently, which apparently is...
That's the nice way.
So yes,
it's amazing. You're smiling away at this, and I'm not sure whether you're grinning through the pain or you're actually smiling. But I can't imagine there was much smiling in 2019, 2020 when these quite traumatic events were happening.
Well, do you know, it's funny because Marco first got into recovery in 95, so I've had a long experience of Marco's drinking.
Right. So let's just define that term, recovery, because people outside of recovery circles, in inverted commas, may not understand what that means. I understand it. It's something I work in, the field that I work in. So when you say somebody's in recovery, you're not meaning he broke his leg and was wandering around on crutches for a while. It's not that sort of medical recovery. What do you mean by recovery?
Right. So, Marco basically in 1995 had a problem with his liver, and he went to see a specialist. And at that time, I was presented with the fact that he had spoken with the specialist, and the specialist had said that he was an alcoholic.
Right.
And rather than have a liver biopsy, he really needed to go into rehab. And so that was a great shock to me, because I didn't know much about alcoholism, and I definitely didn't think, I mean, my husband drank quite a lot, but we were all working in investment banks, and we all drank a lot and we all partied a lot.
Yeah.
And so it was bizarre to suddenly be presented with an alcoholic when I had a vision of what alcoholism was. And
what was that vision? What did you think it was?
That, kind of a down and out drinking special brew in the park, someone who went out on a Saturday night, got leathered, and then came home and beat up his wife and kids. Just stereotypes of what I thought alcoholics were like. And so it was a baptism of fire. But what it did do was explain some pretty strange behaviour. Suddenly, strange behaviour had a label. So that was 1995.
Because the reason is this: I think a lot of people don't. Some people might be surprised by you saying, well, I didn't know until the specialist told me that my husband was alcoholic. I know that that's true. I've heard that story so many times, not just from the family, but from the alcoholics themselves as well. There's this word that's often used called denial, which might or might not explain your experience. You said that you were both part of a heavy drinking culture because of the work that you were in, and it's not unusual, I think, that people might hide some of their substance misuse disorders by choosing a career. Do you think Marco did that? Is that part of it, or is it just?
No, not at all.
think, in that one.
No, not at all. I mean, Marco's alcoholism, you know, he always used alcohol as an anesthetic to hide from things, a coping strategy. So Marco's coping strategies first started when he was a teenager, and he was a very accomplished musician. So at the age of 13, to be leader of the school orchestra and to play solos terrified him. And so that's when he first started using alcohol as an anesthetic. And I would say throughout Marco's life, whenever the noise in his head got too much, or he couldn't cope with something, or he just didn't feel good enough, then he would use alcohol to shut down his head.
You know that? Did you, or like you said, it's when you got the diagnosis, you suddenly made sense of some bizarre behaviours. Is that what you meant? You suddenly went, oh, that's why he did that? Or did you?
Yes. No, I mean, it was kind of, that's why, so when he was diagnosed as alcoholic, that's when I first started to learn about alcoholism.
Okay.
But that was 20, how long ago is 1995? 27 years ago.
Maths, forget it. On a good show, I can't do maths. On a live show, absolutely no chance.
No, so 27 years,
right.
27 years and 4 rehabs. And also, you know, over those years, knowing so many alcoholics, so many family members, you know, I kind of know a lot more than I did in 1995.
You just said all these relapses and stuff like that. I guess, I suppose one would imagine, okay, so you get this shock, my husband's an alcoholic, okay, he's going to get his treatment and then he'll be fine. Yeah, it's that sort of attitude, I guess.
And I would go one further than that, in as much as that Marco went into treatment, and after a week, when his radio was confiscated because he was isolating, he left, and you know, and I was told if he doesn't go back, he will die. He'll never stop drinking without treatment, and then he didn't drink for 5 years. And our lives became much, our life's work, we were very happy, even though he was diagnosed as an alcoholic. But, you know, we were really happy. His career was good. And so alcoholism went away for 5 years.
Right.
But then it came back.
Okay. So he had a relapse, and what was that like for you?
Well, it was a bolt out of the blue, because after 5 years, you forget someone's an alcoholic, especially if they don't drink for 5 years. So he didn't drink. And so when he relapsed, it was like, I don't know, just being thrown over the edge of a cliff. You know, just watching somebody self-destruct when everything in our life was so happy. And that's the weird thing about alcoholism, that everything can be perfect, and suddenly you know, a nuclear bomb goes off, whereas you can have a really tragic time and be going through some really dark things. And, you know, my husband would be the strong person and not touch a drop. And so people would say to me, what's wrong? Why is he unhappy? And, you know, alcoholism is a mental illness. And, you know, it just is, you know, when his head went off, he would relapse.
Okay. And I guess people have asked you this question, but you didn't think at that time, all right, I've had enough of this, I'm off, I'm out of here. What was going on with you? I mean, I'm sort of more interested in focusing on you, because
No, absolutely.
We
And I
focus on
guess,
the addict and the alcoholic. They're the interesting stories, right? That's the
yes,
like magpie, like we go and collect these bright stories. But as I said to you in our telephone conversation, I'm sort of bored with that story. I'm much more
yeah.
interested in
Oh,
what's
I
going
could
on.
talk. I can talk for England about me.
Yeah.
Yeah, but I guess the thing about Marco was, and people used to say, how did you suffer because you knew Marco? Marco and I, when we first met, I just moved down from the coal mining village in Nottinghamshire, and I was working in a investment bank, and it was the 80s, and it was all very glitzy and shiny, and I felt completely out of my depth. And Marco was the kind of nucleus around. He was the star attraction around. Everybody congregated around Marco, and I had a vision of who Marco was, and then I did get to know Marco, and I realized that we both came from very similar backgrounds and had very similar stories, in that we both did not know who our fathers were. So we both had chaotic mothers, or mothers who did not want to discuss who our fathers were. In my case, I'd found a divorce petition when I was 11, so I at least had a name, because I was named in the divorce petition as the proof of adultery. So I had a name, even though it wasn't the name on my birth certificate, but I had the name of my father. And as a teenager, I actually found out where my father was. Mm-hmm. So I had the choice, if I wanted, to go and see my father. Mm-hmm. As it was, I chose not to, and he subsequently died. But I knew who my father was, and I had a choice. In Marco's case, he did not know who his father was, and his mother wouldn't tell him. And that haunted him. He was desperate to find out who his father was. So we had so many things in common, and he gave me the self-confidence I never had before. Right. And he just used to make me feel incredible, and still does now. Still, whenever I'm nervous, I think, oh, what would Marco say? Yeah, right. And so he gave me incredible self-confidence and self-belief, and I guess I gave him the security that I knew who he really was, and I still liked him, because actually the real person was so much nicer than the cabaret act he put on for everybody else. And so, yeah, I got that self-confidence and self-belief from him, and I just adored him, and I still do adore him. Even though he's dead, yes. I don't feel he's gone.
Yeah. I mean, it's interesting because, like I said, I met Marco on sort of many occasions over the years, and I recognise that description of him as somebody who was kind and caring and loving and interesting and creative. The music stuff was quite a significant feature of his life. I remember when he was still alive, when he got back into his music, and how sort of excited he was. And I remember talking to him about that, because he was shitting bricks. Yes. And he really was. He was very open and vulnerable about those things, and very lovable because of that openness and that vulnerability, as well as being, very professional and very skilled. He was a great salesman. He was, very sort of diplomatic, unlike me. He was able to sort of maintain relationships in the addiction field, unlike me, and very skilled. So I get all of that. So I'm saying that so that people understand the context, that he was genuinely decent, nice, kind. I'm intrigued for you, the experience of, because you go from that experience of like, hang on, he's drunk so much his liver's almost gone, I didn't notice that. Okay, he has this, and then I'm told that he's going to die unless he pays somebody loads of fees to stay in their rehab, and he doesn't. Okay, I mean, that's a story I've heard many times.
Yeah.
And then he relapses. The relapse, though, I'm guessing, like a lot of relapse is, and this is why in the UK for a long time we didn't have abstinence-based approaches, because relapses are really, really messy when they happen, right?
Yeah.
And I'm guessing that relapse was quite messy and frightening in some ways.
Yeah, well, I guess the thing about Marco's relapses it wasn't, oh, Marco had a relapse and then he went into treatment. A relapse would take,
Yes,
on average, between, a year, 18 months. And of
that's
course,
genuinely what happens.
when you're going through it, you don't know how long it's going on for, or ultimately what's going to happen in the end. And
what was your experience watching that? Because I'm guessing he was the sort of person that was quite tortured during his relapses. I've never seen him in a relapse, but I'm imagining he was quite tortured.
Well, tortured in as much as he would try and hide it from people. Yeah. And the more he hid it, the more frightened he got. Yeah. And for me, not knowing what was going to happen next, because everything would revolve around his need to have a drink to stop the shakes. Yeah. Sometimes we would go to bed at night and Marco would be sober, and I'd wake up at 7 o'clock in the morning and have somebody completely off their face because he'd be up all night drinking through the fear of whatever it was. And sometimes the fear is that free-floating fear where you don't actually know why you're frightened.
Yes, that's a weird one. I've had it the last couple of days. It went today after my yoga class. I was very grateful for it, but it's a very strange feeling, that free-floating anxiety. Did you have kids at that point during that time? Or when did your kids arrive on the scene? I'm just trying to raise the family while this was happening, as it were.
Right. So I have 2 children. One is my stepdaughter, and I've known her since she was 2. But we only used to see her every other weekend.
Right.
So to a certain extent, Marco would sober up for the weekend. Jack, our son, he was 4 when Marco first went into recovery in 1995. So he'd never really seen his dad drunk, or he'd never seen his dad drink alcohol, although he did know that Marco was alcoholic because we were always quite open about it. So his first experience of real life alcoholism was when he was about 9. And for him, it was scary because he knew that dad didn't drink. And, we talked about alcoholism, and, although he'd run away from the Priory, we did have friends who were alcoholics. And so alcoholism had been a normal part of our lives. But for my son, who was living with it, it was frightening. It was frightening because Marco was he was the one who had all the time for the children. He was the one who did fun things, took them out, went to see Jack play rugby. So when the devastating thing for us, whenever my husband relapsed, wasn't, he was drinking, what mood was he going to be in? Basically, he checked out of our lives. Yeah. And so suddenly I'd lost my confidant. The kids had lost their entertainer. And it was sad. It was really sad. And we just wanted him better. So that's why I never left, because it was devastating to watch somebody so lovely in so much pain.
Yeah, I'm just going to say, because we talked about this and I said I would say this, that, often with alcohol in particular, there can be abuse, there can be violence in particular. That never happened to you, right? Marco was never like that as a person. And in fact, I remember when you told me that when we were chatting before the show, and I went, oh, that's nice to know, because I wouldn't have liked to have thought of him in that way. But it is very common. And I would say to people who are listening to this and maybe going through it who does have an angry, controlling, or violent partner, you need to get out of that relationship. You can't hang around. So this is Michelle's story about staying with somebody who wasn't a risk to her or the children. But if your partner is a risk to you or your children, you really need to sort of get authorities involved and get yourself to a place of safety. So I just want to say that very clearly to people. And also I'd say that because as an ex-social services manager, I can tell you if you allow your children to be exposed to risk, that you will face consequences yourself as a non-abusive parent. So we have to say that, I think, I have to say that, make that very clear ethical statement, and then we can continue if that's okay, Michelle.
Yeah.
And so I get that. He checked out. He became, as we would say, self-obsessed and obsessive about the drink, and he wasn't available for you or the kids. And that first relapse went on, 18 months, something like that. Yeah.
Yeah, I'm trying to think. We bought a so we bought a house. We'd moved house. I think, he relapsed just before the millennium.
Yeah.
And he went into treatment in November. Because I had to cancel my son's birthday party, which is why I kind of can date it. So I had 11 months, and in that 11 months, I was hiding from everybody what was going on. Because
why did you do that, Michelle? What was going on?
Why did I do that? Why did I hide things? Yeah. Because the first thing that happens is when you, in my shoes, whenever I said Marco's relapse, there were two schools of thought. One was you need to leave him, and the other one was what are you going to do to fix it?
Right. Okay.
So whoever it was, whoever I met, whoever I told them, all they wanted to talk about was Marco and Marco's drinking, i.e., when are you going to leave him, or how are you going to fix it?
Which is why I don't want to talk about it. You know,
and so
it infuriates me, to be honest.
Yeah. So therefore, for me, it was like, I'm not going to say anything, because when we meet up, we can talk about the weather, the gossip. We can talk about anything. We don't need to talk about Marco. I can have a holiday from Marco and Marco's drinking.
Absolutely. Absolutely.
So that's why I used to deny Marco's drinking. And also for close family members like his mother, and later the children, I was saving them from the pain and agony that I was in. Yeah. Because, it was painful for them. So, yes, that's why I used to hide it. Because
was there anywhere you did go during that first relapse period? Because there was 4 in total, weren't there?
Yeah, there were 4 in total.
During his final relapse, is that correct? Did I hear that?
He died during his final relapse. Well, he actually died when he was detoxing. But yeah, so
a very common thing, and we can talk about that. But
yeah.
Again, it's one of the reasons why for a long time we avoided doing abstinence-based work around substance misuse, because particularly with alcohol, it's quite dangerous, the withdrawal period, and it can do what it did to Marco. I mean, it needs to be very thoughtfully, it needs to be thought about and medically supervised, folks. So again, a health warning, if you're dependent on alcohol, you're listening to this, don't just stop, go and see a doctor.
Yeah, I mean, I have
things can happen, all right?
So, yeah, I've been through so many detoxes, and they're horrific. Especially when you have DTs.
Well, the Rimsky-Korsakoff's or whatever it's called disease that comes with it is really...
I mean, there's so much, but so
you're going through this first relapse, people are sort of taking sides, so you don't feel there's people that just emotionally you can deal with. So you use the support network you've got just to sort of check out yourself, if you like leave that behind. I just want to talk about what's on the news or plan a holiday. I don't want to talk about the stuff that I can't do. Were you getting any support at all during that, or did that come later?
I mean, I went to Al-Anon, and I went to Al-Anon, and yeah, so that was good. But Al-Anon is very much of the detached with love. And
tell us what Al-Anon is first, for people who don't know.
Oh, right. So Al-Anon is the family support group for people who live or have lived with alcoholics.
Yeah.
And it's very much based on the AA 12-step.
So Alcoholics Anonymous for the alcoholic, and Al-Anon for the family, friends of the alcoholic.
Yes, and they are so similar that and there are, I mean, I don't know what it's like now, but certainly, even though I was in London, there were very few meetings. And so if I had nowhere to go, I would just go into an AA meeting because, people would just assume that I was just struggling and couldn't admit that I was an alcoholic. Right. And I would just sit and listen. And it would be helpful because the sharing at AA is very much like the sharing at Al-Anon. It's the same stuff. And, lots of similarities, really. And so, yeah, I just used to get support by going to meetings and trying to do other things, and not, and I think I twigged this fairly early that, Marco it was heartbreaking to watch Marco miss so much in the children's lives, especially. And I was determined that I wasn't going to miss it. So, I would go and watch Jack play rugby. I would go and see Hannah in a concert. And I would do things and not use, oh, Marco's ill, I need to look after Marco, I need to do this. I would carry on doing things anyway.
Somehow to stop yourself from becoming obsessive about his illness, as it
well, I could, you cannot do anything. Well, I couldn't do anything. And believe me, I tried, and I talk in the book about some of the things I did, crazy things to try and get him to stop without and nothing worked, absolutely nothing, including interventions. Nothing was going to stop Marco from drinking.
Again, these sort of terms that people might not know. What's an intervention? Tell me what I need to know.
Right. So an intervention
very American thing. I can't bear them, but you go ahead. Right.
So the last time Marco relapsed, and there was nothing we could do. He had been arrested at. This is how crazy alcoholism is. On his way to a conference about alcoholism and addictions, his plane was late. His plane was delayed by 6 hours.
It's not funny, but there is a conversation we're going to have about this.
Yes, he was so bloody angry that I assume, I don't know, because I've never ever got to the bottom of this, but I can write it, I can imagine it. So because his plane was 6 hours late, he just went to the bar and drank and drank and drank till the point that I'm assuming he collapsed at the airport, but he was arrested at the airport and he was held in a cell for 24 hours. And eventually the police let him make a phone call to me. And yeah, so then I had to start explaining to all these people he was supposed to be meeting at a conference about alcohol and addictions that my husband was pissed in a cell at Toulouse Airport. And to me, that was the final straw. My son was adamant his dad was going into treatment. So we got a specialist and we got another good friend to fly over with my son to stage an intervention where we all gave him no option but to go into treatment or we would all leave him.
Okay.
And
these are services that you pay for, aren't they? They're not just
random. Yeah, they are services that you pay for, yes. Yeah.
So there are people called interventionists who I sort of know about them. They get to write these letters, very emotional letters, saying, "I love you, but I'm going to kill you if you don't do exactly what I say."
Yeah, but you see, in the case of Marco, because in latter years he worked within the addictions industry, on a sales and marketing management consultancy side, not therapy side. He knew his way around the block, and he knew everybody. So even knew the interventionist.
Sure.
So it was always very difficult with Marco because he just knew how to play. He just knew how to play everybody, and he just had a way of being the world's leading expert on everything, because he was a very good mimic.
So let's come back. We've just described that process. I'm intrigued sort of by your process. So you have this first relapse, and I guess that's a sort of landing in reality for you. Whatever the honeymoon was around the first period of sobriety, the reality comes 12, 11, 18 months or whatever it was of sort of then decides eventually he's prized off his sort of wherever position he's in and goes into another residential treatment service, I presume.
He went into, and he did a 28 day in the Priory again, and the first but this time he did the 28 days.
Okay.
He did the 28 days. Everybody thought he was wonderful. He came out, he did 90 meetings in 90 days. He went to aftercare.
Was the perfect patient. What was going on for you during all this time? Did you go, oh, wow, that's great, he's finally got the message? Or were you
no. I was the typical wife. I was the typical wife when someone goes into treatment, because it suddenly becomes all about them. Everybody on the outside, how's Marco doing? Oh, you must be so happy. Everybody inside was talking about how important Marco's recovery is.
And he's got to first and
yeah, and can you take the bins out? No, it's bad for my recovery. I need to speak to my sponsor. And it's kind of like, well, take the bins out, then speak to your sponsor. No, my recovery must come first. So I was very angry.
Sure. But with justification as well, he wasn't.
Oh yes, and I would say, and if Marco was here now, he would agree with me that there is nothing more selfish than an alcoholic working their program.
Holier than nonsense. But also, it's actually, I think, and this is a point I'd like to make, if that's okay. I think services for family members around mental health and addiction are appalling.
They are,
and the emphasis is on the patient, the identified patient, and people might say, well, that's quite right, isn't it? But I had a couple on last week. I don't know if you saw the show, but they're an amazing couple. One used to be a copper, the other was a prison officer. And they were both high-flying in their careers, and they met, and their careers grew. And then she developed bipolar disorder. And her husband, the way he talks about it, says, we got it. It was us that got the bipolar, not her. And they've worked very much as a couple around it and talking about the idea that it affected them, it affected all their family around them, and they had to work in that way. And it was the most amazing description of how it should be, but it's so rare to come across that. And it was like, your story is more familiar, which is that the identified patient, because they've got the moolah, that's where the money is, I'm afraid, they get whisked off to this nice sort of rehab, and you're left doing what exactly?
Well, in my case, I was left, wondering where, which credit card we could use to put the next week's thing on. Don't tell Marco, because Marco will get upset. And also, everybody, how's Marco? Nobody, how am I? Yeah. And I was bloody angry, because I was holding down a job. I was making sure the bills were paid. I was looking after my son. I was the one saying to having to say to people, you know, oh, my husband's in the Priory, you know, if Jack behaves in a strange way. So I was the one having to do all the practical stuff.
Right.
And, you know, and when he came out, the family are looking at me to look after Marco, when actually...
And there's an implied message, isn't there? Is that if you don't step up and do this, you're going to be responsible for him relapsing. And there's a sort of burden of that, unless you let him get on with this. And I sort of, it's interesting. What do you think about that on reflection?
On reflection, I used to be terrified of, one, being accused of enabling,
yeah,
two, being accused of, not allowing Marco to reach his rock bottom.
Yeah.
So on the one hand, I've got people telling me that, you know, I should stand back and let him reach his rock bottom and not enabling him. And then on the other hand, I've got this other group of people who are saying, oh, you can't let Marco die. You can't let Marco this.
It's very bipolar, isn't it? It really is.
It is. And I'm in the middle and trying to do the best for my husband. So that's like showing everybody, oh, look, I'm not enabling. Oh, look, I'm not doing this. I'm not doing that. When in actual fact, you know, and everybody had a view on how I should be running my life.
And things clinically, what I would say to families is that I'd be looking for signs of trauma, to be honest. I don't really use that sort of enabling model, all of that, which comes from, I think, a clinical model which is broken, has never been that good anyway, but it does end up blaming families or putting too much responsibility on them for somebody else's shit, you know, because you were never responsible for Marco in that way.
No, I wasn't. But, you know, I did feel, and, you know, and I'm sorry if I use, sorry to people who don't understand AA speak, but, you know, it is a shorthand. But, you know, I would often feel that people were taking my inventory and I was coming up short, and I would be desperate not to come up short. And, you know, even in aftercare at the Priory, you know, we all used to sit round, because in aftercare you have the addicts or the alcoholics or whatever you want to call them, they'd go off to their groups, and then we'd have family member groups. And, you know, there'd be the people whose family member was sober and, you know, and their life was all lovely. And then there'd be the failures. And that was those of us whose husband was drinking, had relapsed. And, you know, and although my husband was star pupil with his 90 in 90 days, you know, he started drinking again. He relapsed almost immediately after 90 days. And it took him a couple of years to get into recovery again. But, you know, he came out and he was slipping and sliding for a couple more years.
What's your view then on this whole treatment industry thing? So let's go into that conversation. What's your sort of view on its efficacy, its usefulness, its help for you? I mean, not even for Marco, just thinking about you and your experience of it.
Well, it helps. I mean, it helps. I mean, I wouldn't. There are things I have taken along the way. I mean, at one point I did have some therapy sessions, which were great. And you know, and I do apply a lot of what I've learned along the way in practical ways. You know, the biggest one is not to try to be perfect. And, you know, my motto until I started running a bed and breakfast and worried about what booking.com and TripAdvisor say about me. But previously it used to be 7 out of 10 in everything.
Yeah.
So, you know, and if I was heading up towards 8 or 9, I knew that I needed to back off because I would be frazzled and angry and irritable because I was trying to spin all the plates.
I call it 70-30 when I'm talking to people. Yeah. 30 and between 30 and 70, you're okay.
Yeah.
You're a perfectionist. If you're below 30, you're giving up, you know. So yeah, absolutely.
Yeah. And I remember one therapist, and I forget her name now, but she was like a James Bond villain, and her specialism was food addictions. And I was terrified of her. And she stared at me and she said, "Michelle, there are 3 things I want you to do this week." And I said, yes. What are they? What are they? And she said, "I want you to make 3 mistakes. And then I want you to come back and tell me what they were."
Great.
And I was so frightened.
Absolutely horrified. You must have been horrified. I was going to imagine.
I know, I'm thinking, what mistake's going to do? What mistake's going to do?
Perfect mistake now.
And it's got to be a big mistake. It's got to be a good mistake. Otherwise she'll shout at me. But yeah, it is that just wanting to be good. A good person, and failing terribly, because when I look back, everybody used to think I was the stroppy cow, and poor Marco being married to me. But the stroppy cow was the one who was clearing all the shit up, basically. Whenever Marco wasn't available, and and every time he came back, in fairness, he was so horrified by what he'd done. But he did give us everything he possibly could when he was well, but we never knew when he wasn't going to be well, so we couldn't rely on him.
I think there's a one-trick pony in some of these residential sort of treatment approaches, and I wonder if something else might be more effective. That's water under the bridge, though. So what I'm hearing you say is that some of the things that did help you was having a peer support network, at least somewhere we could go and offload and identify with people. And that could have been people in Al-Anon, it could have been people in AA, in the meetings, that you found those supportive and helpful. And so, we're both concerned, both you and I are concerned about what works for people and what helps. The other thing I had to say was that some of the personal therapy you had was helpful in terms of helping A, process some of your personality issues, but B, give you practical help and advice. Is that right?
Yes, and one of the things that I got, which I have rigidly applied because I've always been so terrified, was that when I was having this therapy, Jack, our son, was about 9 or 10, and and all I've heard is that alcoholism is a family illness, and I'm thinking, please don't let him be an alcoholic. I could cope with being married to an alcoholic. I couldn't cope having one as a son. And, it was, what could I do to help him not be alcoholic? And one of the things that I got from those therapy sessions was to allow him to make his own mistakes and to accept responsibility, and to be there to support him, but not to clear up his shit, basically.
Ripping people is a really bad idea, particularly children. They need to make mistakes. I would also add to that, I think one of the really good skills, this is a good skill for everybody, but it's also, it's known to reduce the incidence of any sort of mental health problem, is really good stress management and coping skills. One of which being, being able to talk about things. And I guess, did Jack know at some point, did you to talk about this stuff? Was Jack able to offload on you and let you know about it as a family?
Yes, and
talk about.
Yes, and we've always, when Marco went in I think it was the 3rd time he was in, and at one point the 4 of us went to an AA meeting together, an open meeting, and somebody used to call us the Von Traps. It was just like, oh, we become the Von Traps, and the joke was, did we sit around the fire at home and get out our big books? But so no, we were always open about Marco's alcoholism, but it didn't mean that it wasn't terrifying. And Jack particularly tried so desperately to get Marco to stop, and he was still he was still trying right up until he died. And so
I think it's one of the things that people don't get who haven't been through it, is the fear of what's going to happen to the loved one in the relapse. And also because it's a high risk thing. When somebody's really, really drunk, they do dumb stuff that they might hurt themselves, and they might end up in prison, etc., etc. So there's a constant anxiety and fear, which produces anxiety, depression, but also traumatic, post-traumatic responses in people, intrusive thoughts, nightmares, stuff like that. Did you see that type of functioning in Jack at all?
Yeah, absolutely. You know, and the number of times he'd say, "Mom, I don't want him to die," and
yes, exactly, yeah.
You know, and that isn't, you know, a 10-year-old saying, "Mom, I don't want him to die." That's a 30-year-old saying, "Mom, I don't want him to die."
Yeah. Side of thing I think people don't really get, and why you can become, as a family member, so desperate about the plight of your loved one, is because fundamentally just afraid they're going to die and really trying to avoid this catastrophe that's inside your head, this ultimate catastrophe.
Yeah, and it's not just they're going to die; it's they're going to die in the way that you fear.
Yeah.
And so, you know, that when Marco did die, quickly, painlessly at home, the initial reaction was, "Oh my God, he's safe."
Yes.
You know, I mean, that sounds bizarre and it sounds warped, but for me, it was, "Oh, thank God, nothing bad's going to happen to him."
Yeah. It reminds me, I don't know if this is correct, I'm trying to identify with it, but when you talk about it, it reminds me of something like, because my mum died of cancer and it took about a year. By the end of it, it was like, oh, thank God that's happened. It was like, because there was only one way it was going, which was she was going to die, but she was no longer in pain. And we didn't have to suffer being impotent in the face of, because there was nothing we could do about it, you know? And it was like, oh, actually, that's all right. I'm okay, that's happened.
Yeah, and so, you know, it was when it happened, because it happened suddenly, you know, none of us were expecting it. Although, you know, his drinking had got to the point where I couldn't see a way back. And so we had got to the point where we took the good days, and when Marco wasn't drinking, we had a nice time. And then on the bad days, I just hunkered down basically and waited for him to sober up again.
Yeah.
But, you know, but always fearful of what was going to happen next, you know. And so
you're in France, you're on your own, it's in the middle of a pandemic, or it's the beginning of a pandemic, which becomes, we don't know which direction it's going to come. And your response was to what? Write it all down?
Well, the reason I wrote it down was that Marco, as I said, I adored him. He was my biggest confidant. We used to tell each other everything, no matter how inappropriate. You know, and often I would say, "Marco, if anything happens to me, you must never ever tell a new partner the things you tell me, because it will just get you into so much trouble." And he used to say to me, "Oh God, don't die. Whatever you do, don't die." Because that was my second thought. "Oh, Marco, look, I'm still here. Yeah. I didn't die." Yeah, and so when he was drinking, that was my biggest heartbreak, that I'd lost my confidant. Yeah. And so I used to write stuff in my diaries. And then when he came round, you know, and we'd catch up, and I'd tell him all the things he'd missed and all the kind of little, you know, day-to-day things, bitchy things about people and things that just make him laugh. And I used to tell him then, and I really missed him, and I missed talking to him. Yeah. And so writing was me having a couple of hour conversation with Marco. So I just sit at the laptop.
I love that. That's a really nice.
And I talked to him, and, you know, as the alcoholism took a toll on his memory, he couldn't remember things. So often we would reminisce, and I would tell him I'd tell him stories of things we'd done together and jog his memory. And he used to say, "Oh, I love it when you tell me stories." So that's how I started to write the story of our life together. And also for me, because I'm thinking, well, you know, if I've got Alzheimer's, my grandkids, at least, you know, they can sit and read my stories to me. And so that's why I started writing the stories. And it was lovely, you know. I just used to think, it was like reliving it all. And now, I'm just starting to get the initial reactions from people who've read the book. And they're saying, oh, yeah, some of it's really dark. I loved writing it and I enjoyed all of it, including the dark parts. In fact, some of the dark parts were my favorite bits to write. Yeah. I just love being there, going back there.
And in some way, it seems to me somehow it's like it's a fitting and appropriate way to try and hold on to and celebrate this really interesting relationship that the both of you had in the face of quite serious adversity, a very serious.
Yes, yeah, and I hate the fact that, especially when he died, because he died as a result of his alcoholism, is that, my husband was an alcoholic who died, who drank himself to death.
Yes.
And I hate that as a label for somebody who was incredible. And I didn't, and I've never shied away from the fact of admitting that he's an alcoholic. I'm not ashamed of it, but he was so much more. That was just a tiny dimension of who he was, which was what
thing for me, and this is me talking, I suppose, clinically, but also thinking about, I'm sure if Marco was here talking about you, he'd be talking in equally glowing terms about how amazing you are, because you've literally just talked about how amazing Marco was. That says something about you and the sort of kindness inside of you and the strength that you have inside of you, because I guess my point is this: Marco wouldn't have been such an amazing person if he wasn't married to you. That there was something that you both gave to each other that made you both amazing.
Well, I think it was this shared experience from our childhoods that we both felt in some ways inadequate and lost. And it was kind of like, it was almost like, it sounds a bit creepy actually, but a bit like Hansel and Gretel. We were lost and then we found each other, and he gave me loads of self-confidence and I just made him feel safe. And so I am glad that I am the one left, because he has left me with that self-confidence, whereas he would.
You've written this book which is now a memoir that can share the experience of people, and the book is called?
It's called Dear Marco, and it's a memoir. I'm looking at the title because I get the order wrong. It's a memoir of addiction, family secrets, joy, love, and loss.
Which could be a good title for a book, which I think it is. James will put a link to it, to the paperback copy. There's something very nice about having an actual book in this online world that we live in. So, folks,
it is.
And also, interestingly, is the choice of where you are, this B&B. And again, what's it called, your B&B?
It's called Maison La Motte.
I think James put a link to it as well. But it's actually on the Camino do whatever walk, isn't it? There's sort of
the Camino de Santiago. In France, we call it, and I will say this in my best East Midlands French, it's the Chemin de Saint-Jacques de Compostelle.
Terrible.
It's not.
I'm surprised you're allowed to stay in the country speaking French like that. They usually kick you out if you can't speak French with an accent, but there you go. So it's interesting for me because it's on this route of pilgrimage, and there's a lot of people traversing through and traveling through, and it's a good place to find a B&B. It makes sense because you've got a lot of passing traffic, footfall, as it were, literally. But there's something else in that choice, isn't there, about you being on this pilgrimage route?
Well, I mean, when we bought the house, we didn't realise we were on the pilgrimage route.
I know you didn't realise, but you somehow realised, right?
So complete fate. And so I now meet all these interesting people from all over the world who are walking to Compostelle in Spain. And on this particular route, they're walking from Le Puy, which is where the lentils come from. And that's 400. So by the time they get to me, they've walked 450 kilometres. and they've still got 1,000 kilometers to go. Lots of them don't do it all in one go. They do it for 2 weeks and then come back the following year and do another 2 weeks. Some do walk all the way in one go. But listening to their stories of why they're doing it, incredible. I'm meeting some really incredible people.
I don't believe in this stuff, but I'm going to say it anyway. Somehow you were meant to be in this place.
Oh, absolutely, absolutely. And it is. It was like all the things that Marco did before he died, even though, on lots of occasions he was drunk. It was almost like he settled me here and then he went.
Yeah, I'm getting that feeling.
And he went, but he's still here. Whenever I'm having a moment thinking, I can't believe I'm doing this, I've got no experience, and he'll just go, oh, you're fucking amazing, just go for it, and
there's also something about, because there's something about you that you manage to find love and compassion and caring within a situation that a lot of people said you should walk away from, and you clearly have a huge capacity to be compassionate and caring and supportive of other people. That's a fact. And I like the idea that total strangers, tired, footsore, total strangers are washing up on your shore now still, and get your smile and your generosity and your kindness and your rubbish French and the beautiful meals, I'm sure, that you produce for them, because you've got 11 of them at the moment. You just finished a meal this evening for 11 people.
Well, no, that was the night before, but and they were doing the washing up for me. So they do things for me, which is great. And yeah, so I have the best time. And now, of course, we can all hug again. So lots of hugging and kissing. Whereas during the pandemic, we weren't allowed to hug. So it's lovely.
I'm sure we won't be allowed to hug soon with monkeypox or something like that. Who knows? I don't care.
I don't either. But yeah, and so so it is great. So I'm really happy, and the essence of Marco is still here. And
I tell you what I'm really happy about is listening to the story, because I think the story of family is lost all the time, constantly, and it annoys me. But also that you've written it down and it's available to be shared with other people, because what's saying, for every one addict stroke alcoholic, there's at least 4 people's lives that it can potentially destroy. Go on.
Sorry, yeah, and if there's one group of people that I would really like to read this book, it's for those who think, those people who have a family member who is with an alcoholic that they think they should leave, but why does my sister stay with her husband?
Yeah.
What is it like? And it's that kind of, this is what it's like to love an alcoholic.
Yes.
And, this is what it's like. Because, yes, there are some violent alcoholics, there are some violent non-alcoholics, but there are lots of lovely alcoholics. And, people stay with them because they're lovely and sensitive souls, lost souls. And, this is my experience.
Well, I'm very grateful that you've come on, and that you have, had the courage and the luck, because who can plan a pandemic, the time to write this book. I'm sorry about the loss of Marco. He was a really, really lovely man, and I was very sad to hear. But also, I think I also embrace it because, if you're in a relapse, I sort of think, well, either you get out of the relapse or you move on away from it in some other way, and he's probably better off in some ways. It's not my place to say it, but it's such a miserable place, a relapse for everybody. So I get it, We have to leave it there, I'm afraid, Michelle, because we're at the end of I told you the hour would flow by, and everybody says, oh God, I've got nothing to say for a whole hour. But always, we've run over it. We'll maybe bring you back again in 6 or so months' time, just to see how things are going and how you feel now you've written the book and what people's responses have been and where your life's at, because I'm infinitely interested in recovery in the broadest sense, not just as defined by a program, whatever that might be, but in that broader sense of people who embrace who they are in their life and try to be the best version of themselves, which to me you epitomise, to be honest.
Oh, thank you.
And it's really lovely to talk to you about it. You say that, I'm going to end the show, say goodbye to folks, and I'll catch up with everybody next week. I think I'll still be in England next week, but the following week I'll be in France myself, seeing my beautiful boy, so with my even worse French. So there you go. Bye bye for now, folks, and I'll see you all next week. You stay there, Michelle.